Hey folks, welcome to our lesson on photography, indexicality, and truth. We're going to be looking at this article called What's the Point of an Index or Faking Photographs by Tom Gunning. It's going to help us think in a more complicated way about the relationship between photographs and this category of signs called the index. Now, Gunning is going to make two major claims in this essay. The first one that permeates the entire essay is that what we call the photographic index, or the quality of photographs that we call indexical, is not the same thing as the truth claims of photographs. He'll say they're often lumped together, they're often smushed together, but they are not the same thing, and there's a danger in conflating them. And the second thing he'll argue throughout the entire paper is all about the relationship between pre-digital photography and digital photography. He's responding to a flurry of arguments that theorists make about what has changed in the digital era. So his argument might look something like this. Pre-digital and digital photography are not as different as we've theorized them to be. So those are the two major arguments that permeate the piece, but I'm going to look at two smaller arguments that we can look at chronologically to make sense of how he's making those larger arguments. So the first is digital photographs are no less indexical than analog photographs, and the second is analog photographs were never straightforwardly indexical anyway. Let's look at that first argument. So he begins his essay here, and he says, I'm excited but also a bit dismayed by the current discussion of newly emerging media, especially when this discussion provides an account of the older media of cinema and photography. He continues, while I believe that the possibilities and realities of new media invites us to, in fact demands that we rethink the history of visual media, I also fear it can produce the opposite, a sort of reification of our view of the older media. So what he's basically doing is responding to some trends in the way that theorists will make sense of the difference between pre-digital photography and digital photography. And he's worried that when we make a lot of the new, we actually forget about what was before. That we simplify what already exists or what is past in order to make claims about how the new thing is new. He continues, let's tackle one of the largest problems first, the truth claim of traditional photography and to some extent cinematography, which has become identified with Charles Peirce's term indexicality. So here he's introducing the terms of the essay, what he's going to discuss, but I want you to keep in mind that this relates to what we just talked about earlier, that he thinks that this discussion of indexicality and digital photography is a symptom of a larger theoretical or scholarly tendency to make claims about what is new, that is digital photography, by constructing a simpler account of what is old or what already exists, that is pre-digital photography. So let's just remember what he's talking about. What is this thing called the index in photography? So C.S. Peirce is an American pragmatist philosopher who has three categories of signs. And it's a major argument within film and media studies that photography as a medium is a special kind of sign, which Peirce has a name for, and the name for that is the index. An index is a sign that shows evidence for the existence of what it refers to, like a footprint or a bullet hole. When I look at a footprint, I know that a foot was there in the sand that left that print. In the same way, when I see a photograph of an apple, I know that an apple must have been in front of the camera in order to produce the image of the apple that I see before me. This is distinct from an icon, which is simply a sign that bears a physical resemblance to the thing being represented, like a figurative painting seen here, and a symbol, which is a sign that has no resemblance between the signifier and the signified. The connection between them must be culturally learned. It is arbitrary. Written in spoken words, like the sound tree, is a symbolic sign because it doesn't bear resemblance to the thing that's outside with bark and leaves. Now, does this mean that photographs can't contain iconic and symbolic aspects to them? Of course they can. Photographs are heavily iconic because they really resemble the things that they signify. The photograph of an apple looks a lot like an apple. And sometimes you can put words in a photograph and they would have symbolic signs. But importantly, the conventional argument goes, photographs are a special kind of sign that have indexical qualities in the way that, say, paintings do not. And where do we get this argument? Well, we get it from a few sources, but canonically speaking, we get it from a reading of this essay called The Ontology of the Photographic Image by French film theorist André Bazin. And look at a sentence like this, and you'll see that relationship between photographs and indexical signs like footprints or fingerprints. So Bazin says, the existence of the photographed object shares in the existence of the model like a fingerprint. It was sentences like these that led this person, film theorist Peter Wolin, to write in his book, Signs and Meaning in the Cinema, that Bazan's ontology essay is really well understood through C.S. Peirce's notion of the index. The truth of the matter is, Bazan never used the word index. He never invoked that term, and he never invoked C.S. Peirce. That is a reading of Bazan that has become canonical, such that when folks teach Bazan, they often teach it with the concept of the index, but Bazan never said it. Gunning is going to make a big point of this at the end of his essay, so hold that thought for now. So how do we understand the idea that photographs are indexical? Just think about it this way. We know that photographs are produced by light hitting an object, bouncing off that object, and into the lens of a camera. And that something about the way that photographs are produced involves light directly imprinting itself onto a photosensitive surface that we call film. That physical connection between light, the object, and the image of the object is what gives us the motivation for saying that photographs are indexical. This is an indexical sign, this painting is not. So Gunning introduces this idea that he's going to respond to conventional notions of how photographs are indexical, and then he says, both aspects that he mentioned in the previous sentence, that is, number one, the truth claim of photographs, and number two, the indexicality of photographs, need investigation. The nature of the truth claim, he says, and the adequacy of indexicality to account for it. Then he says, this becomes even more obscure when critics or theorists claim, I hope less frequently as time goes by, that the digital and the indexical are opposed terms. And then he's going to summarize the argument that some people have that with digital photography, we no longer have indexicality of photography. And he says that argument goes a little bit like this. The indexicality of the photograph depends on a physical relation between the object photographed and the image finally created, right? The image on the photographic negative derives from the transformation of light-sensitive emulsion caused by light reflecting off the object photographed, filtered through the lens and diaphragm, right? Light hits the apple, and then that light from the apple goes into the lens of the camera and touches, in some sense, the photosensitive surface, right? The light-sensitive emulsion. In a digital image, however, instead of light-sensitive emulsion affected by the luminous object, the image is formed through data about light that is encoded in a matrix of numbers. So remember, this is not Gunning's argument. This is an argument that Gunning is summarizing and responding to. So who is he actually summarizing and responding to? Well, one person that he's summarizing and responding to is someone like D. N. Roderick, who wrote a book called The Virtual Life of Film, in which he says something that sounds a lot like Gunning's summary. He says, digital capture should be understood in contrast to analogical transcription as a process of calculation in which time is measured as the conversion of light into code. Digital capture involves a discontinuous process of transcoding, converting a non-quantifiable image into an abstract or mathematical notation. In digital capture, the indexical link to physical reality is weakened because light must be converted into an abstract symbolic structure independent of and discontinuous with physical space and time. It's a little bit harder to understand than Gunning's summary, but more or less the logic of the claim looks like this. That light directly imprints itself on film to create a pre-digital analog image in photography. But in digital photography, light must be converted to code to create the image. It's that extra mediation of taking the light, converting it to code, and then converting that code into a recognizable image, say the image of the apple, that is the source of the claim that digital photographs are not as indexical as pre-digital photographs. So what is Gunning going to say about this? We know through his rhetoric that he's not going to agree, but how is he going to argue against this? He says, but what problem does this change present? The change he's speaking of is the change of digital photographs. And how does it challenge indexicality? Clearly, a digital camera records, through its numerical data, the same intensities of light that a non-digital camera records. Hence the similarity of their images. Right? So reasoning number one, they both use light. And they produce images that look the same. Then he says, the difference between the digital and the film-based camera has to do with the way the information is captured, which does have strong implications for the way the images can be stored, transferred, and indeed manipulated. He'll continue, but storage in terms of numerical data does not eliminate indexicality, which is why digital images can serve as passport photographs and the other sorts of legal evidence or documents which ordinary photographs supply. Now, I think this is a wonderful argument, and there's really two pieces to it. Gunning is reminding us that even though in a digital photograph the light is converted into code, it's still light that ends up becoming the image. The conversion into code is a process that is a mediation, but it doesn't ruin the index. And then he makes another claim based on the observation of how we socially adhere to believing in the indexical value of digital photographs. We still use them. We still believe them. My driver's license is a digital photograph. If I post a picture of my vacation to Paris on Facebook, you'll likely believe me that it is a document of my being there in front of the Eiffel Tower, even though it's a digital photograph. Gunning continues. The indexicality of a traditional photograph inheres in the effect of light on chemicals, not in the picture it produces. The rows of numerical data produced by a digital camera and the image of traditional chemical photography are both indexically determined by objects outside the camera. Both photographic chemicals and the digital data must be subjected to elaborate procedures before a picture will result. So here Gunning is saying that maybe if the argument that digital photographs are non-indexical relies on the idea that the conversion to code is this big old mediation between the light and the image of the apple, we might say the same thing about pre-digital photographs. There's a whole bunch of mediation that has to go from the light to the image of the apple. There's chemical processes. There's waiting for the image to show up. But what matters is that both pre-digital and digital photographs are the result of a relationship between light and the apple. They are the starting point, and the ending point is a picture of the apple that looks very similar. The claim that digital media alone transforms its data into an intermediary form fosters the myth that photography involves a transparent process, a direct transfer from the object to the photograph. Aha. So now Gunning is getting back to that first thing he said, the larger claim that his paper is really about. This tendency in media scholarship to simplify old media in order to make novelty claims about new media. By saying that digital photography doesn't have an index, these scholars are saying that the conversion to code is all of a sudden a brand new mediation, a huge step in the process from light to apple to image of the apple. But Gunning is saying, don't forget that there's a whole bunch of steps in between the light and the image of the apple in pre-digital photography. Don't simplify the previous thing in order to make novelty claims about the new thing. They're both complex. Okay, so once again, we might summarize these sets of arguments this way, that digital photographs are no less indexical than analog photographs. And that saying that they are actually does a disservice to the complexity of how analog photographs were produced. They're not single-step processes. So now let's move to the second claim. Analog photographs were never straightforwardly indexical anyway. We've talked about this already, but let's see the kinds of things that Gunning will say to elaborate on this claim. So here he'll give us a litany of examples of mediation, that is, the intermediary steps and choices that separate the light hitting the apple from the image of the apple. He says, the mediation of lens, film stock, exposure rate, type of shutter, processes of developing and of printing become magically whisked away if one considers the photograph as a direct imprint of reality. In other words, photographs, he says, are not direct imprints of reality. That is a fallacious way of understanding what photographs are. And that the novelty claims about digital photographs are in some sense creating that myth that pre-digital photographs are this very simple direct imprint of reality. I'll continue. Thus, the very strong claim that digital images can be manipulated in ways photographic images could not must also be qualified. Indeed, the much heralded malleability of the digital image does not contrast absolutely with photography. So here he's moving on to a new observation. He's not just talking about the way in which digital photographs are produced. Now he's talking about a slightly different but related question: how easy it is to manipulate digital photographs. We talk about this all the time, and it seems intuitive. Digital photographs are so easy to manipulate. We have Photoshop and the like. But he wants to say, not so fast. Don't create the false impression that because it's easy to manipulate digital photographs, it's therefore difficult to manipulate pre-digital photographs, or that it wasn't done. He'll continue. He'll give us a litany of examples of ways that you can manipulate a pre-digital photograph. He'll say, retouching, use of filters or lenses, selection of angle of photography, exposure time, use of specially prepared chemicals in the developing stage, or adding elements through multiple printing. These are all ways that you can do photo manipulation before digital Photoshop. And then I'll say, traditional photography therefore also possesses processes that can attenuate, ignore, or even undo the indexical. No question, digital processes can perform these alterations more quickly and more seamlessly. There's his qualification. But the difference between digital and film-based photography cannot be described as absolute. So there he was just talking about the possibilities of manipulation. But what about historically? Were there practices of manipulating pre-digital photographs? Yes, there were. He'll say, we must keep in mind that only a limited practice of photography ever made accuracy or truth claims an essential part of its practice, and that many uses of photography intentionally flout such claims. So what uses is he talking about? He's a big fan of spirit photography, an often 19th century practice of creating multiple exposures to create the image of spirits or the dead within photographs. He'll give examples of surrealist photography and really art photography in general. When I look at this image from photographer Man Ray, I'm not compelled to believe in the indexicality of these multiple faces. I'm not compelled to believe in the indexical qualities of this woman who purportedly has a back that resembles a violin. And Gunning's rhetorical aim in using these examples is to posit a continuum between pre-digital artistic manipulation of photographs and digital manipulation of photographs, of the sort that is supposed to delight rather than fool. Both clearly involve aspects of photography, both clearly manipulate photography. They don't fool us into believing a truth claim about something that was there and wasn't, but they also clearly use photography. And he'll explain. Our delight in a clever digital manipulation of a photographic image in an advertisement or magazine cover does not come from being fooled by the image, but rather by its playful push-pull between its associations with accuracy, that is how a woman's face actually looks, and its obvious distortion. But no woman's face looks like that. He'll continue, but just as a counterfeit image relies on us still believing in the reliability of images, a playful image that deconstructs itself before our eyes relies on our common investment in the photograph's ability to show objects accurately. He's saying that our delight in an image like this one, which is clearly not real, still relies on our recognition that it involves aspects of the photographic. And that's why it's fun to look at. He'll say the relationship between recognizing the photographic and enjoying it is similar to the fact that a counterfeit photograph, that is a photograph that wants to fool you into believing a set of events or circumstances that never took place at all, relies on the fact that we tend to believe in photographic images. There would be no such thing as a counterfeit photographic image, an image that lies to you, if we completely stopped believing in the fact that photographs depict what is in front of them. So here I want you to think back to that example I used earlier. How often is it when you're scrolling on social media and you stumble upon a picture of someone in front of the Eiffel Tower and it doesn't seem to be a joke? How often do you think skeptically about that image being fake, even though you know its capacity to be fake? Remember that Gunning's goal is partly to deflate digital film theorists' belief that the digital results in the waning of our belief in the photographic index. He's saying that it's still very much there. He'll continue. Thus, I would maintain the particular artistic and entertaining delight of digitally manipulated photographs depends on a continued investment in the photograph as potentially an accurate representation. And he'll explain himself more further when he actually describes the Man Ray photo that we looked at earlier. He'll say, yes, the back of a woman does not have incisions like the soundboard of a violin. This photograph makes no truth claim. There never was a woman like this. So again, he's trying to remind us about the difference between a truth claim that can be applied to a photograph and the qualities that make a photograph. That is, perceptual accuracy, recognizing it as photographic, or at least partly so. So now he's going to start to get into that question about truth claims. And here I think is one of the most important arguments in the entire paper. The truth claims of all photography relies on more than the index. So here he's going to jump from examples of pre-digital photography that clearly flout the claims to the index. And now he's going to start to think about this question of what a truth claim about a photograph is and how we get to it. He said, just as I try to untangle the idea of visual accuracy from simple indexicality, I would now like to consider the truth claim of photography that relies on both indexicality and visual accuracy, but includes more, and perhaps less, than either of them. He'll continue, I use the word truth claim because I want to emphasize that this is not simply a property inherent in a photograph, but a claim made for it, dependent, of course, on our understanding of its inherent properties. I just want to highlight that and read it once again, because I think it's central to this entire paper. I use the word truth claim because I want to emphasize that this is not simply a property inherent in a photograph, but a claim made for it, dependent, of course, on our understanding of its inherent properties. In other words, there is nothing about photographs themselves that is truthful. Truth claims are statements that we make about photographs. And photographs are indeed special kinds of objects that often get roped into truth claims. But photographs themselves are not truthful. Bereft of language, he says, a photograph relies on people to say things about it or for it. To simplify, we might say, while indexicality describes a relation between the object photograph and the image of that object, truth is a function of speech, and photographs don't speak. People do. He'll continue, both historically and institutionally, in order to tell the truth, the photograph must be subjected to a series of discourses, become, in effect, the supporting evidence for a statement. So he's pointing out the very basic fact that photographs themselves don't speak, but are used often as evidence for statements, right? When we talk about truth claims in photographs, we must remember that photographs, when they're used, say, in a court of law, always have a heap of context behind them. That is, a set of statements, so that we know in what way a photograph is being used to support a kind of statement. I'll give you a really simple example. Remember that apple I showed you earlier? So the idea that a photograph is indexical, or that the photograph indexes the existence of this apple, is a bit different from the idea that the photograph is evidence for this claim. This was the apple that you took a bite out of. It would be a very bad photograph indeed, because the apple is turned such that I can't see the bite that was taken out of it. Think about how limited photographs are and what they look at. Photographs can only see the apple from one angle. It's only a snapshot in time. There are things outside of the frame that I can't see. And how do you know this is not the same apple in question, but an entirely different one? And how do you know when the photograph was taken? All of these questions matter when we're talking about truth claims. The image itself does not itself speak a truth claim. The truth claims are always made by people. So now let's move on to, I think, the final set of arguments that Gunning makes about photography. He'll say, number 3, the index is not adequate for understanding the experience of photographic images. So throughout this text, Gunning has largely granted the use value of this term index for understanding the uniqueness of photographic images, right? Early on, he was trying to tell us that digital photographs are just as indexical as pre-digital ones. But now he needs to take a step back. He'll say here, I am positing a phenomenological fascination with photography that involves a continuing sense of the relation between the photograph and a pre-existing reality. While this is precisely what indexicality supposedly involves, I am less and less sure this semiotic term provides the proper term for the experience. So this is the first time that he's actually indicating that he's not satisfied with the term index. And then when he uses that term phenomenological, he's suggesting that his interest is in a quality of experience of photographs. He'll expand. I'm not sure that the indexical explanation fully accounts for our fascination with the photographic image, its sense of perceptual richness, and nearly infinite detail that strikes us as somehow more direct than other forms of representation. He's interested in the photograph's perceptual richness and nearly infinite detail. One way that you can understand his argument is to say that we've been so obsessed with looking at one of these categories of C.S. Peirce's signs for understanding a photograph, the index, that we've lost sight of the importance of the icon, physical resemblance to the thing being represented, perceptual richness, and nearly infinite detail. Surely perceptual richness and infinite detail is not part of the indexical qualities of the photographic image, it's part of the iconic qualities of the photographic image. And he thinks that the iconicity of photography is very special in the history of images. Not just the fact that when I look at a photograph, I believe that what I'm seeing is an image of something that was once there in the past. So that's one way we can interpret this. But we shouldn't lose sight of a second way that we should interpret this, which is to say, we need to abandon C.S. Peirce's categories altogether. Why? Because C.S. Peirce's categories are not about the richness of the experience of art objects, or objects in general. They're about signs and signification. He'll explain in his final paragraph. The description of a photograph as putting us into the presence of something needs to be explored outside the concept of the index. To explore this further, the actual visual experience occasioned by the photograph needs more probing. Here, our delight in visual illusion may play as important a role as indexicality. And if we are to deal with illusions, it seems to me that the play with photographic imagery that the digital revolution allows may provide the perfect playground/laboratory for a greater understanding of a fascination that I maintain is likely to have a future. So once again, he's saying here that the categories of sign systems, index, icon, symbol, are not adequate for understanding a perceptual experience of a unique medium. one that he thinks continues to be unique with digital manipulation. Okay, that's it for our video on Gunning's essay. I hope that was useful, and I'll see you next time.